Hey everybody. So we're about to go ahead and get started. Um, I'd like to go ahead and make an announcement that anytime if you have a question, you can just type it in the chat. I will be reading them and kind of asking them for y'all if you have any thoughts. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the virtual program today, Grant Reporting and Budgeting for Success, Culture with Kelly Howard. I'm Charlotte Levat. I serve as the Carey Center Assistant Director of the Community and Collegiate Programs. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to thank this year's sponsors. This virtual program's presenting sponsor is the Walker Area Community Foundation. The Walker Area Community Foundation is a nonprofit grant-making organization building the permanent capital needed to daily facilitate community conversations, inspire action, and empower partners. This year's community and collegiate program sponsors have pledged to support our efforts in providing meaningful programming for the nonprofit sector. Thank you to Auburn University Outreach, the East Alabama Community Foundation, the River Region United Way, Auburn University Outreach, Office of Public Service, Social U, the Drummond Thorne Stooks Fund for Excellence, and a community service grant made possible by State Senator Randy Price and State Representative Joe Lavorne. Since joining Grants Plus in 2021, Kelly has provided expert grant writing and grant seeking guidance for a portfolio of clients across various industries. As a senior advisor for writing, she uses her strong writing and coaching skills to ensure that Grants Plus's team members produce high quality written products. Kelly has 20 plus years of experience as a grant professional and is an active member of the St. Louis, Missouri chapter of the Grant Professionals Association. Prior to Grants Plus, she served as grants officer at the St. Louis Art Museum and previously enrolls at the National Network to End Domestic Violence in Washington, D.C., and other human social service nonprofits in Iowa and Missouri. She holds a bachelor's from Simpson College and a master's from the University of Missouri. I would now like to turn it over to Lauren Steiner, CEO of Grants Plus. I think you might be muted.
Oh my gosh, I'm yammering away. I'm so sorry. Oh my
No, you're
gosh.
so fine.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you to the Carey Center. We are so excited to be here. I was saying that grants reporting and grants budgeting, maybe not the most exciting, topic, but I know that Kelly will make it as exciting and interesting as possible because at Grants Plus, we love talking about grants. So we can talk about grants in any way, shape, or form, and we find it very interesting. And I hope that you will be on this journey for us and find it interesting as well. And hopefully that will give you some nuggets that will really help you. I do want to share just a tiny bit about Grants Plus. We are a company of 35 grants professionals. We believe that when nonprofit organizations have the institutional funding that they need, they can really change the world. So, for nearly 20 years, we have been singularly focused on helping nonprofit organizations secure institutional funding through foundations, corporations, and even the governments from time to time. We're proud to be the country's leading strategic grant seeking firm, and our team has helped nonprofits raise over $370 million in funding. And we believe in relationships and building lasting relationships with funders. Especially grateful to those funders of the Carey Center that Charlotte mentioned, specifically the Walker Foundation, for making this session possible. And thank you to everyone on the call for the important work you do and for welcoming us into your community. So I will turn it over to Kelly.
Thank you, Lauren. Welcome, everybody. We're glad to have you here today. We are going to be talking about grant reporting and budgeting for success, as you know. And really what we're going to go through today is just you can see here on the agenda. I'm going to just start with a quick introduction and sort of setting the stage for the webinar. Talking
Kelly,
about
there is a pop-up. It says Elisa's note taker Otter AI is requesting to record. Do you see that on your
Oh, I
screen?
do.
She said you could
Yes.
decline it in the chat.
Okay,
Oh,
Sorry, I just didn't want to interrupt you.
there we go.
oh, that's okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. I did see it, but I couldn't see it on my screen, but I saw it on my other screen. So thank you. Yeah, so yeah, just looking here quick at the agenda, talking about some grant budgets, some sort of features of grant budgets, and using those to your advantage. Same sort of thing with using grant reports to your advantage and transforming the way we think about them. At the very end, we'll just go through a few key takeaways, and I'll share some additional resources with you, and then we can end with some questions and discussion. So with that, I will just, do a quick introduction of myself. Obviously, you heard what Charlotte shared with you. My name is Kelly Howard. I'm the Senior Advisor for Writing at Grants Plus. I've been there for a little over 3 years, about 3.5 years, but I've been a grants professional for 25 years or more. And really my passion in this field is really focusing on writing and quality assurance. I identify as a writer, and I love to help other people improve their writing skills. That's what I do at Grants Plus as part of my role there, and that's really where my passion for this field lies. So I'm really happy to be able to do that at Grants Plus. So just setting the stage a little bit before we get into talking specifically about budgets and reports. I just wanted to sort of set the stage a little bit. Obviously, I think, we're all sort of in tune with what's going on in the world right now and the fundraising climate. I think we can, definitely expect some increased competition for limited resources as we move into the rest of the year and the foreseeable future. We've all received that dreaded vague decline telling us that the funder receives far more requests than they can support. And I think that we're likely to see more of these. There's massive amounts of federal grant dollars that are going to become unavailable, that have already become unavailable. At least 30% of nonprofits rely on government funding. This is a statistic from a blog post that I recently read on Candide, and I will share the links with you and the resources at the end. 40% of human services organizations or direct service organizations that receive government funding have reported it as their primary source of funding. And just another little tidbit here, HHS alone, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, has rescinded 1,236 grants worth more than 10 billion combined so far, and 6.8 billion of that was unexpended when it was rescinded. So that just, again, talking about, how challenging the fundraising climate is going to be. It's already been challenging, and it's going to get more so. And I think that the result of that is going to be a change in funder expectations. If you want to, just in the chat really quickly, if you've noticed any changes in what your funders are already expecting, go ahead and share that there. It'd be interesting to get that conversation started. During the last sort of chaos, period and in our recent history, in 2020, 21, when the COVID pandemic was active, active and pretty much taking over our lives, funders really loosened or eliminated the grant restrictions that they had. The Center for Effective Philanthropy's report, before and after 2020, there was a huge decrease in time spent on applications and reports, definitely an increase in the amount of unrestricted funds that funders were willing to give. I think that, we have to ask the question, are they going to react the same this way? It's sort of, TBD at this point, I think still. There's the Meet the Moment pledge. Some of you may have heard about already. And again, I'll share that in the resources. Just asking funders to step up and fill in where the federal government and perhaps other funders are going to pull back a little bit. So knowing that philanthropy is likely to be asked to do more, funders could also be expecting more from their grantees, and maybe tighten the reins this time instead of loosening them like they did in COVID. And so I think we need to be prepared for increased accountability and impact. funders are going to be looking for evidence of organizational health and sustainability, and the capacity to be a good steward of funds. And you have the ability to show this in your budgets if you're not already. The demonstration of alignment with values and priorities as your funders, showing this in your applications and in your reports. Looking for the ability to think strategically and learn and evolve from what we learn through doing our programs and services, and being able to share those insights and collaborate with peer organizations, and keep communicating this in ongoing communications and relationship building with the funder. So I think we just need to understand, funders use reports as a way to sort of do this unspoken assessment of an organization. Do we trust them to be good stewards of our resources? Is this a partnership that's going to reflect well on us as a foundation, as a funder? Is this organization genuinely committed to addressing the need and not just coming to us time and time again to secure that funding? Does this organization have the capacity to implement what they propose they're going to do? And is this organization going to be one that is easy to work with, or is it going to be a challenge? So I think we just need to keep those things in mind going forward when we're thinking about reporting and communications with our funders. So you guys know we're here to talk about budgets and reports today. And grant success really depends on a lot of factors, as I'm sure you know. But the two key tools that we can use to our advantage as grants professionals are our grant budgets and our grant reports. We're going to start with budgets, and this is not a session to talk about how to create a budget, but we are going to dig in a little bit to the characteristics of a good versus bad budget, because a solid, realistic, and clear grant budget is going to set you up for success. And alternatively, a vague or unrealistic, unclear budget that the funder can't understand is going to cause you problems further down the road. So let's start by talking about our budgets. So I think the thing that I would like to communicate very clearly up front is that, budgets should never be viewed as just a bunch of numbers or a required attachment, and certainly not as an afterthought to your grant application. Just like your narrative, budgets tell a story to the funder. They demonstrate that your organization is healthy and sustainable, which gives the funder confidence that your organization is a good steward of funds or has the ability to be a good steward of funds. And we have to make them clear and easy to understand, numbers that make sense, that are connected to the narrative, and that are contextualized, so that we're not leaving space for the funder to have to make guesses or draw the lines themselves. So when I say that grant budgets tell a story, what I mean by that is that your grant budgets are connected to your narrative. They're telling the same story as your grant narrative and not introducing surprises. For example, disconnected line items, something like, there's a line item in your budget for something like mileage reimbursement, but the narrative doesn't say anything about the need for staff travel or, community outreach or anything like that. The funder's immediately going to ask, why would we pay for reimbursement when this program or this organization doesn't seem to need that? And then the same thing, or similarly, missing essential components. The narrative might mention activities that don't have corresponding budget items. So, you may not be asking a funder to cover all of the costs in your budget, but showing them the full breadth of it and explaining why those budget items are there is important. And that also is going to help you demonstrate some leverage and some diversification in your funding to show funders that they're not the only ones supporting your program. We also want to make sure that we have appropriate cost allocations in our budgets. So that's distributing shared costs in a way that makes sense, making sure that each program or department receives a fair share of those shared costs, meaning things like rent, administrative staff, equipment, stuff like that. And like I said, fair and reasonable, not disproportionate to the request. So making sure that, for example, you're not allocating 50% of your total cost costs for rent and utilities to a single program if that doesn't make sense. If you have 6 different programs that would share those costs, you need to make sure that those are spread out over those 6 programs. And again, that you're making sure that you're explaining that in your budget. There's also, there's different ways to allocate costs. I'm sure that some of you are familiar with this, or your finance people are familiar with this. Probably a direct allocation of program-specific staff and supplies is the most realistic. It's probably the one that you see the most frequently. It's probably the one that's going to be the easiest for funders to understand. So I think this is an opportunity for us to have conversations with the finance people in our organizations and really understand how costs are being allocated, and being able to understand that. So if questions come up, you can answer them. They need to be realistic, so correctly estimating your costs, not undercutting yourself or overestimating to pad your budget. And that they also need to be consistent. So that means like allocations and line items should be consistent across all of your programs. There are obviously times where you have to adapt your budget to a funder's specific form or preferences. And when you have to do that, just be sure that on your side of things that you're documenting how you did that, and how you divided those things up if it looks different from your budget, so that when it comes time to reporting, you set yourself up for success, and where things are going to fall in the line items that you put in that funder's form or their preferred format. And then I've mentioned this a couple of times already, but including explanations. Not every application calls for a budget narrative, and that's fine, but there is always space in a budget to include explanations and descriptions of what's going on. Those notes help the funders make sense of the story that your budget is telling, and again, connect that back to the request, and don't leave them guessing about the connection between what they're seeing in your budget and what they're looking at in your budget form. So budgets we also need to be able to demonstrate sustainability in budgets. If we assume that some grant funds are going to go away, which I think that's a safe assumption at this point, what are you going to do? Can we talk about identifying alternative sources, such as, maybe some phased in fee structures, matching commitments, those sorts of things. Or showing how you can scale back if you need to, serving fewer people because you don't have the same resources you used to, or collaborating with another organization doing similar work to reduce that replication of services in your community and save some costs there. And also highlighting where you have costs that are building capacity and infrastructure, investments in staff training and certification, or equipment and technology, how those are helping you build long-term internal capacity to deliver your programs. Another feature is leveraging. So obviously talking about other funding sources, individual donors, other foundations, unrestricted income, program income, all of those different things, just showing that you have a diversification of income to support your programs. Also highlighting your in-kind resources. I think that sometimes this gets overlooked, but it's an important part of a grant budget or a program. If you have donated supplies that are coming in on a regular basis, if you're using space that's donated by a partner, you can include all of that in your budget, and that again shows further sustainability and leveraging of resources to maximize the program and the budget. And then lastly here, just talking about as far as capacity and leveraging, looking at volunteer time and including that in your budget as well. The independent sector releases a report every year or every couple of years. It's their value of volunteer time report. In Alabama, the volunteer of value time is $30.59 per hour. So think about, what the impact of that could be, or what that would look like in your budget if you included that, and how you could leverage that as a way to really show the funder that you have the ability to sustain the program. And then also looking at cost efficiency, economies of scale. If costs decrease as your program reaches its ability to maximize its capacity, explaining that, talking about that, or showing future savings from investments in technology and staff training, like I mentioned earlier. I think in summary, just, showing generally that you have a good grasp on where dollars are needed and how you can maximize the funding that you have coming in to support your program. And I'm going to just reemphasize again, those written explanations, providing that context that may not be apparent with just the numbers alone, and that you may not have space to include in your narratives, if you're faced with the word counts and character counts and those sorts of things. So just making sure that you're providing as much detail and as much context as you can, again, just so that the funder is not having to draw those lines and make those connections themselves. And lastly, well, before I get into this, I'm going to ask Charlotte to go ahead and launch a poll that we set up. I'm curious to know how confident you are in your ability to explain a grant budget or a budget report to a funder. So Charlotte, if you could launch that poll, we can give people a minute to answer that while I'm continuing to talk.
Yes, so I actually think I don't have the ability to do that anymore.
Oh, okay.
But if y'all want to type it in the chat, then we can look at it on there.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Yeah, just share it in the chat. So how confident are you? Are you, super confident, kind of confident, not confident at all? There's no wrong answer. But feel free to share there, because I think that's a big piece of what we need to, as grant professionals, really going forward. We really need to be able to embrace our roles as, I say here a finance semi-pro. I don't know that that's like a little bit too formal, but we really need to be able to understand budgets and look at budgets and be able to explain the program budget, be able to explain the results of the funding, where those dollars went. And that's going to be having conversations with your finance department and making sure that you're building that relationship and investing time and effort there. And I think that an important piece of this is, asking for what you need, what you really need, versus like trying to minimize your real costs because it looks like you can do it cheaper. I think that this is something, at least in my experience, that I've seen happen with finance departments and grant budgets. And just remember that those are old habits and they may die hard. So having that conversation with your finance people, whoever is creating your grant budgets, assuming it's not you, just making sure you're keeping those lines of communication open and saying, we need to show our real costs here. We need to be upfront about what this is costing us so that funders understand the impact of their dollars when they give them to us. So, you don't have to be an accountant to understand budgets. Just become friends with your finance team, and just understand that from our seats as grant professionals, we really have the power to set our organization and ourselves when it comes, time to report on what happened in the grant up for success. And knowing that we kind of hold that power and that we can kind of steer that ship in the direction that we want it to go, and we don't have to rely on the finance people for all of that information and context. We can be an active participant in that. So just in summary here, you can see this here on the slide, but non-strategic budgets are disconnected from their narratives. They contain obscure or vague details. They use a one-size-fits-all approach, and they include under or overestimated costs. Whereas strategic budgets are, well aligned with your grant narrative and with the eligible costs provided as outlined by the funder. They're clear and easy to understand. Funders can easily identify where program costs connect to the activities that you're talking about in your application. They are tailored to the funder or the request, meaning that they show that funder what that funder is most interested in seeing versus, like I said earlier, that cookie cutter approach where you just, send the same program budget to every funder. And then also a strategic budget is going to show your real cost for doing work that's being proposed. So I think I can pause there really quickly. I have not been able to keep an eye on the chat really, but Charlotte, do we have any questions?
No, I believe the chat more right now is just saying if they were confident or not.
Okay. Yeah. So that's good. Yeah, I'm scrolling through here now. Some people are very confident, some people somewhat confident. I see, Michael, you'd asked the question here about the source for the information about the $30.59 value of volunteer time. I share that link in the resources in this presentation, which you'll get after the webinar today. So you'll definitely be able to find that. So yeah, everyone's seems like they're fairly confident. At least no one's saying that they're not confident at all. That's good. All right. Well, then I'm going to continue on to the next section here then, which is transforming grant reports. So, like budgets, I think the other grant tool that you can use to your advantage is your grant reports. And like budgets, grant reports are more than just outcomes. They're not just numbers, they're not just stories, they're more than that. They should hold some meaning for the funder, and they should be balanced in a way that provides a well-rounded view of what was done and why it's important. Why it's important to your organization, why it's important to your community, but also why it's important to the funder. So meaningful, when I say that, what I mean is, if you haven't already sort of approached your grant reports from this mindset, I think, shifting to think of grant reports from the funder's perspective, what are they looking for in those? They need to be accountable to their boards and stakeholders. So they need to be able to demonstrate how and why this is a good investment for their foundation. And, they're looking for evidence that's going to support their strategic decision-making about future investments. So using reports as a way to not just tell the funder what you did, but remind them of that alignment, why they funded your organization, why they invested in your organization in the first place, and then demonstrating how your results connect back to their mission, to advancing their objectives, their priorities. And again, not just saying what you did, but drawing that extra line, going that one step further of saying this is why it should matter to you, and this is why you should continue to invest in our organization. And then funders are also evaluating grantees. They're using reports to evaluate grantees as potential long-term partners. So this is an opportunity for you to document why you're worthy of a long-term partnership with this funder. And, really show them that they've made a good investment, that, that you've carried through on what you said you were going to do, that you're advancing what they care about, and that you're going to continue to do that in the future. Your grant report can communicate all of that. And so balanced means that you're telling a story with your numbers and stories of impact, but that you're also sharing insights beyond those outcomes. That's both quantitative and qualitative results. The numbers are important, but so is the real impact. And then, showing both the breadth and the depth of what you're doing. So how many people have been served? And then how have lives been changed as a result of that? Or how have conditions been changed as a result of that, of the people that you've reached or the communities that you've reached? Reports should also be contextualized, again, linking your outcomes to the funder's mission and goals. How does what you achieve the funder's goals? and demonstrating what those outcomes mean for the population that's served, the community, the people you're serving, the other organizations in your community that are doing similar work, showing what it means for improving quality of life or for improving community conditions for the people that you're reaching. And then, showing the funder how their investment is contributing to that larger change. And it's more than just financial support. It's an investment in changing conditions in your community. And then I think the last thing I would share here about balanced is, making sure that you're being both reflective in your reports and forward thinking. And what I mean by that is, reflecting on the successes, the challenges, and the lessons learned, talking about what you achieved, what you learned, those sort of things. But also, what that means, sharing the insights that you learn from those lessons, those successes, or those challenges. And to the extent that you can, to the extent that the funder and what they're looking for, highlighting how those insights may be contributing or benefiting the funder's broader portfolio. So what knowledge are you contributing to the field? Are you positioning yourself as a thought leader in this space? I will say just really quickly, just caution you, when I say reflecting on successes and challenges, just keep in mind that reports are not the place to share something that went horribly awry in the grant period. You definitely want to have those conversations with funders outside of the reports. If they want you to include it in the report, that's fine, but make sure that you've had those conversations before you're writing it down and sharing it. Reports, I would recommend that you not share serious challenges just in written form with your funders. So I was going to have us do another poll here, but instead I'll just again ask you guys just to in the chat share, are you communicating with your grant funders outside of formal reporting requirements and timelines, or is that the only time that you're communicating with them? So just you can feel free to share that in the chat. I'm just curious to know what people's practices are. So better reporting is better for relationship building. I talked about that shift in mindset about reports, and using them really as a way to build relationships with our funders. If we view grant reports from that traditional approach, it's very transactional. It's meeting obligations. It's checking the box. It's not a strategic approach. So if we're viewing grant reports more from that relationship-centered approach, that is a more strategic way to do this. Because that relationship-centered approach acknowledges that reports are opportunities for communication and relationship building versus just reporting out what we've done. Most funders don't see the reports as transactional and don't want them to be transactional. Kind of like I said earlier, they're using them for a variety of to garner a variety of different pieces of information about their grantees. They're wanting to learn more about the organization, more about the program. They may be using them to advocate for your work internally if they feel really passionate about what your organization is doing. They want as much information as possible so they can say to their boards, to their stakeholders, like, we need to keep supporting this organization. It's important because this is the impact they're having in the community. And then they're also using them to identify opportunities for their own grants, growth and advancement in whatever areas of interest they have. So, what are the lessons learned by their grantees that they may be able to share or provide across their entire portfolio of grantees, and make that larger change in the community. And just keeping in mind, reports can leave a lasting impression. That's, either a good impression or a bad impression. You can build or damage trust with a funder based on the report that you've submitted to them. And you can also give them confidence or doubt that they've made a wise investment in your organization. So just keep that in mind as you're reporting going forward. That this is an opportunity for you to put your best foot forward to really demonstrate to funders why they should be investing in your program or your organization. And just really quickly, before we move on, I just wanted to put in a plug here. At Grants Plus, one of the practices that we do with our clients and something that we highly encourage is courtesy reports. If this isn't something that you're already doing, I would absolutely recommend that you start doing it now. A courtesy report is just a touch point with a funder who maybe doesn't have formal reporting requirements. You know, a lot of times, you know, maybe it's just like a yearly proposal you submit to a funder. They don't require you to submit a report before you apply again. And you know, you just maybe, or not just, but you know, maybe you include a paragraph in your proposal for next year's request that says, you know, thank you so much for your support last year, that sort of thing. I would encourage you to take that a little bit further if you're not already doing it. You know, it doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but, you know, maybe just a simple letter or an update, you know, something you've already created as a marketing piece, maybe a success story, something like that, just to show your funders, again, using that as an opportunity to build that relationship, to show them that, that you're investing time and thinking about what might be important to them, I think goes a long way toward that trust building and relationship building. So I'm going to look over here at the chat really quickly. So people, you regularly communicate with your funders. That's good. I'm glad to see that. Sending thank you letters, forwarding newsletters and event recaps. Those are all excellent ways to do that. Yeah, I mean, I know it does depend on the grant source. Sometimes some of them you have different relationships with than others.
Can I chime in for 1 second, Kelly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Something about something that someone said, forwarding newsletters and event recaps. It's like there's a difference between, I think, like the soft touch. To me, that's a very soft touch. It's not a one-on-one communication. Sometimes one-on-one touch can mean a lot more, especially as you're building a relationship. So think about like receiving an event invitation that you know everybody receives, or receiving an event invitation that someone has taken the time to write on specifically and say like, we'd love to see you there, or an email directly to your foundation rep to say like, hey, we'd love to see you here because you've supported this program and here's the groundbreaking that's happening. It means so much more to get that one-on-one. I know it takes a lot more time, but that's how relationships are really built. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think, you know, on that vein, you know, just another opportunity here for people to weigh in and communicate in the chat. You know, if there are ways that you like creative ways that you do these sort of touch points, these personalized touch points with your funders, feel free to share that in the chat. You may give, you know, some of your fellow attendees some ideas or suggestions. So I would encourage you to do that. You know, I want to sort of like wrap up this section of my presentation talking about, you know, investment in our funders. So, you know, we talk a lot about funders' investment in our organizations, in our programs, but what about our investment in them? You know, what do we need to be looking for, thinking about as far as that is concerned? You know, written reports are these strategic tools, like I've talked about, that you can use to your organization's advantage. You know, I think what I want to say is that reports are, you know, the written way that you can sort of start that process and use them to your advantage. But that relationship building, I think we all know, goes far beyond reports. And so I really would encourage everyone to build a communication strategy that would supplement your reporting requirements. or your lack of reporting requirements. Like I was saying, you know, if you only have to, if you don't have to submit reports to a particular funder, what is your strategy for keeping in touch with that funder throughout the year? And those courtesy reports, those touch points, you know, just those brief informal updates between reports. Maybe you know, maybe something that your organization has done was in the news, and just sharing that with the funder, forwarding it to them and saying, hey, like, I don't know if you saw this, but like, you know, I wanted to share it with you because I thought that it's important for the work that you guys support, and it would be relevant for you to know about. So, or feedback from your from the people that you're serving. If you you know, have some quotes or some feedback of some kind that you've received that you feel really tells the story of why a funder should continue investing in your program or organization, I would, you know, encourage you to share that feedback. And obviously, you know, there's some information around that as far as like ethical storytelling and like making sure that, you know, your clients know that you're sharing quotes and those sorts of things. Definitely want to make sure that you have their permission to do that before you do that. But I think that that's part of that building a communication strategy is figuring out how you do that in your organization, and how you can share that information with your funders in a way that that is ethical and that isn't damaging to the clients that you're serving. So, you know, or stories and events, you know, that's relevant to the funder's specific interests, or invitations to, you know, programs and events. One example that I have, an organization that I work with recently had a like a ribbon cutting event that they invited one of their grant funders to, and they were able to have like a really great conversation with the funder, with the representatives from that foundation during that ribbon cutting event. And you know, 2 months later, it's time for them to submit their final report. And the funder reached out and said, you know, we don't need you to submit a report. We had a great conversation at the event a couple of months ago. We got the information we needed there face to face. We're going to mark this as submitted. We don't need you to submit anything. Or, you know, they may say, you know, just submit, you know, a brief statement that sort of summarizes what we talked about at that event. So making sure that you're having those touch points with funders and that you're bringing them out to see your programs in person to the extent that you can do that, based on, you know, the work that you're doing, the population you're serving, or just other things that are happening in the communities. If you're having, you know, a panel discussion about something, or someone, you know, one of your program people is giving a presentation out in the community, you know, inviting funders to those things are, you know, you can use that to your advantage. And maybe they don't always get to come, but an invitation is always a nice gesture. And then also looking ahead, planning ahead, and knowing that you can use reports and these sort of communication strategies, and the touch points that you're doing as a way to keep the door open for future conversations with this funder. The more you communicate, the more you're putting yourself in front of them, the more they're going to remember you, and the more that they're going to know about you, and they're going to be able to advocate and think, yeah, this is an organization that we, you know, that we need to continue investing in. So just really investing in our funders in the same way that we ask them to invest in us, building that long-term trust and partnership. That is key. That trust and confidence is going to be key to that partnership. And we have the ability to nurture those relationships from our seats as grant professionals, or at least if it's not your job specifically to do that, you know, you have the ability from your seat to, you know, say to your development director, you know, hey, like this is something really relevant to this particular funder. Like, I think that we need to do a touch point here or outreach with them. It doesn't necessarily have to be you, but you can lead the charge and you can lead the strategy, even if you're doing it from a seat that maybe doesn't have FaceTime with the funders directly. So this is another, this is a quote that I pulled from another Candide blog post that I recently read. talking, about the current climate, the current funding climate, what's happening right now. In moments of stability like this one, there's even more need for true partnership between foundations and nonprofit partners, not just in funding, but partnering in new and different ways. And that's really what I want to sort of leave you with, I think, with this presentation. You know, we ask a lot of times, like I was just talking about with investment, what do nonprofits need from funders in this moment? But I think we should also be asking, what do funders need from us? They need honesty, they need information about the impact of all of these funding cuts in our fields and what that looks like in terms of the impact it's having on people's lives. Just keeping in mind that this partnership with our funders is a two-way street. We don't always have to let them drive the bus there. Like, we have some investment in that too. I think that, grant and fundraising professionals who envision and implement these new strategies for communication that are going to build true partnership with their funders are probably going to weather the storm better than those that don't. So that's what I really want to leave you with is, using budgets to our advantage to tell a strong financial story, and using reports to our advantage as a way to build that sort of foundation for building trust and partnership with our funders that goes beyond just a transactional, them giving us money, us doing the program. So I'll just really quickly, I know, we've got about 15 minutes left, and I want to leave some time for questions, just in case anybody has some. So I just wanted to share a few of the takeaways, and then I'll also run through some resources, and then we can open it up to questions. So the key takeaways that I want you guys to walk away with today, expect that funder expectations are going to be changing, and that they're going to want some relationship building efforts from their grantees, and increased trust is going to be critical in the midst of all of this uncertainty and instability right now. Be sure you're developing clear and strategic grant budgets to set yourself up for success. Both in terms of getting the funding in the first place, but also being able to report on it when it comes time for that. Again, using those grant reports as tools to foster those lasting relationships with funders, seeing them as something other than, the transactional required check the box, I submitted my report by the due date. They can be much more than that. And then engaging in regular and meaningful communication with funders to build that trust and partnership that they're going to be looking for. So, when you guys get the follow-up, the recording from this webinar and from the and the copy of this presentation, just know that all of these are linked, versus like sending them all to you as like separate files. I just linked them within this presentation. So a couple of the Candide blog posts that I mentioned, inside Philanthropy, that spreadsheet of HHS grants that have been terminated already, and the value of those. It's pretty shocking when you look at it. The article, the Before and After 2020, how the COVID-19 pandemic changed nonprofit experiences with funders. I think that it's a good time to remind ourselves of what was going on then, and how things changed for the better, and hope that that things change for the better this time too. Those relationships, that we strengthen them, and that we make sure that we're having open communication with funders in times of uncertainty and strife. I mentioned the Meeting the Moment challenge. It's a call to action for philanthropy in 2025 and beyond to step up and help meet this moment as all of these federal funding programs are going away. The independent sector, I linked here to the 2025 Value of Volunteer Time report, and then also like I said, the other Candide blog post, what do nonprofits need from funders in this moment? So all of those will be linked, and you can have access to all of those when you receive the presentation. I also just included a couple of other relevant items that may be of interest, kind of related things. A recent report on how nonprofits can reverse the growing trust deficit in institutions. Our organization's roles in doing that. I'm sure you've heard a lot of news about how society has lost faith in a lot of institutions, educational institutions, but also nonprofit organizations. So how do we rebuild that trust and rebuild the relationships so that society sees us as problem solvers in the nonprofit sector? There's also this nonprofit budgeting scenario planning tool. This provides several different ways where that you can look at your budget in these unpredictable times, especially if you're an organization that's facing some pretty significant funding loss right now, using this scenario tool for developing those alternative budget scenarios and what those are going to look like for your organization. And then just recently, actually just last Friday, President Trump released his skinny budget for fiscal year 2026. The National Council of Nonprofits issued a response to that. And I've linked that here because I also think that that's interesting and relevant and something that we should be keeping our eyes on. So, all right. So I think we can just move on to open it up to questions or discussion. If anybody has anything they want to weigh in on or just share with the group, I welcome that as well.
Yes, everyone feel free to unmute yourselves, ask whatever questions.
No, everyone.
I'm curious.
No one has a question.
I'm
Which is
curious.
fine. No, you don't have to have questions.
I'm really curious if anybody was coming into this with like budget questions. Like I always see this and I never know what to respond, or how do I put overhead into a budget, or anything specific about as you prepare your budgets that ever goes through your mind. Like I just never know how to handle this.
I think one thing that I see is when funders want to know where, maybe they've given you $25,000 and it's a, $250,000 program budget, how you've used their money and making those allocations. Again, I think that is an opportunity where, when you're doing the application in the first place at the very beginning and creating those budgets, making sure you're having those really clear communications with your finance department about how they're going to allocate those funds. And I understand like maybe they can't do it dollar to dollar because it's $25,000, it's 10% of the total program budget. But having that conversation, is this all going toward program staff? Is this going towards supplies? What percentage of it's going toward overhead? And even if you don't have to provide that detail in the initial budget request, documenting it somewhere so that you can refer back to it when it comes time to reporting, I think is a strategy that you can use. If you're not already doing that, I would encourage you to start doing that.
There is a good question in the chat, Kelly. Suggestions for dealing with budgets to actual. I find so often we do budgets based on our best educated guess, but that's not always what it turns out in reality. Tips on how to keep track of this and communicate changes. It's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. Thank you for that. The thing that I remind organizations that I work with is that, like you say, like budgets are based on your best educated guess. They are a blueprint. They're not written in stone. And funders, for the most part, I think funders, particularly the more sophisticated funders, understand that. And so when you're reporting out your budget, when they're asking for your budget to actuals and there's discrepancies, I think that like a 10% mark is probably a good thing to keep in mind. If your budget line items, fluctuate by more, if it's 10% over, 10% under, If it's more than that, I think that's a point where you use the explanations to say, why did this happen? Or, maybe we're just like, we're at a point in our program cycle where, we haven't had to expend the funds in this line item yet because the funds in this line item don't happen until later in the year, or whatever the case may be. That's where you can use your budget notes and your explanations to your advantage to make sure that you're telling that story and helping funders understand what's going on there.
And I'll just
Hopefully
share
that answered your question. I mean, yeah, budget actuals can be tricky for sure.
one related question that we get a lot is about like operating and that kind of thing. And by the way, one of I think you could probably tell by our approach, we really do take a relational approach to grant seeking. We really believe in building relationships wherever those are possible. I think it's important to know how your funder feels about operating support. And so if you haven't had that conversation with your funders, I would encourage you to do that. Maybe in the past they haven't supported operating, but they might be willing to now. Also, when you're preparing a budget, you want to know, are they going to immediately strike that out because it's not a funder that is going to support operating? Or is there a way to put in a percentage of overhead or that kind of thing? So I would say like lead with that, talk with your funders about that. You want to know that going in, so you're not preparing a budget, wondering and hoping and praying that they're not going to cut a part of it out.
Absolutely. And I think on that same vein, the funders that say, we fund programs, but we won't fund staff salaries. This is a really important part of relationship building. Like Lauren said about our relational approach. Having those conversations with funders, that like, I understand you don't want to support salaries, but like the program doesn't happen without salaries. So can we have this conversation about why you're so opposed to that, about the reality of our costs and where the majority of our costs lie, which may be in personnel. And really using that, again, using the relationships, using your budgets, using your reports as tools to build those relationships, to give that context and that meaning so that your funders understand what you need and where you're going, and that they can be partners in the work that you're doing versus just giving you money.
I think that largely answered the question I was about to ask, but I guess I'll still ask it and clarify, is that, so what I see with a lot of the grantors that we deal with is that they are willing to cover, like you were saying, direct programs, but not personnel. And there's clearly, anybody who works in nonprofit understands there's clearly a distinction between personnel that are direct program cost personnel and overhead and administrative personnel.
Right.
Is there a way that you have found to be successful in really being able to help people to understand that? Which is the confusing thing to me is always that most of these are business people who should understand that from the perspective of they work in business, they understand the difference within their own business structure, how that functions. We're maybe the nonprofit, but the realities aren't that different in that we have the people on the ground and then we have the administrative, and we can understand that difference and we can draw that line when we say this salaries we need for programs versus the salaries for overhead, and that there is a distinction there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is another place where, having conversations is the key to answering this question and to dealing with this issue with funders. If we sort of like, transport ourselves back to 2020 and what was happening, when COVID hit and funders all of a sudden opened them up to these types of conversations about, okay, we're going to remove all the restrictions from the funds that we've given you and, use them where you need them. Like we're at another place where we can do that again, but I think we shouldn't expect funders to lead that. I think that we need to come in and remind them like, hey, remember 5 years ago when we had our last crisis? Like this is another crisis, and like we need to have this conversation again. You've reinstated these restrictions on our grant budgets, and we need to have a conversation about whether or not there's any flexibility there. And that all goes back to that relational aspect of grants and making sure that you're having those building your relationships with your funders, not just again, that transactional approach, that sort of traditional approach of like, we submitted our report, we submitted our renewal request, really investing the time and the effort into making sure that we have those relationships so that we can have those conversations. I see there's another question in the chat here about forecasting incidentals throughout the year for facilities with the ever-changing inflation rates and labor cost increases. I don't know that I'm like the best person to answer that. I know that some organizations I work with, include, and I think this is pretty common, when you create a program budget or an organizational budget, that there's a number of assumptions that you include in those budgets. And if those assumptions have changed, again, I would encourage you to, to either notate that in your budget that you're submitting to your funder, or to have that conversation over the phone, via email, whatever that makes the most sense for the funder that you're thinking about.
Well, thank y'all so much. I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Kelly, thank you for a wonderful program. Everyone will be getting an email with a link to today's presentation and recording, a short 3-question survey, and an opportunity to sign up to be a Carey Center nonprofit affiliate. The Carey Center Nonprofit Affiliate Program currently serves over 400 nonprofits in Alabama and beyond, and offers educational programming, professional development, and networking opportunities to nonprofit professionals. Carey Center nonprofit affiliates are the first to learn about upcoming programming, and membership is free. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you at one of our monthly virtual programs or in person at one of our nonprofit training series traveling the state. Thank you. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Thanks for coming today.
Thanks, everybody.